So the children of Israel left Egypt hastily. They did not have time for the bread to rise that was made on that very first Passover without leaven, which would be known as to us as yeast, right? And so it says, so do not eat it with bread made with yeast, but for 7 days eat unleavened bread, the bread of affliction, because you left Egypt in haste, and so that all the days of your life you may remember the time of your departure from Egypt. Deuteronomy 16:3. And so the Passover celebration includes unleavened bread. All right, so most of the time, leaven is always symbolic of what? A lot of times in the Bible, we'll see that leaven is symbolic of sin in the Bible, right? So the yeast would make things rise, right? And what happens to your body if you hurt something? What happens if you get inflammation in it, right? It rises, it causes pain, discomfort, rise. I think kind of the yeast is the same thing, right? So like the leaven that permeates the whole lump of dough, sin will spread in a person, a church, or a nation. And so Galatians 5:9 says, a little yeast works through the whole batch of dough. But Jesus' body was unleavened, right? It did not have sin. And so it was without sin, the perfect sacrifice, right? We remember last week we also talked about the hyssop branch, right? You usually cover the doorpost, and the hyssop branch was take the bread and sprinkle it on those that were unclean. Once they were made clean, once they've been healed, they'd have to go through a cleansing process and everything. And so Jesus, it's amazing how that he's being crucified during the Passover, and that leading up to that they had this unleavened bread, no yeast, and the yeast was a lot of times symbolic of sin. And then you have Jesus, which is the unleavened body, had no sin, leading up to the Passover being sacrificed, right? And then another one I was thinking about, I watched some videos on it. Me and my inmate, they talked about it. Genesis 22. Here, sometime later in Genesis 22, it says, sometime later God tested Abraham's faith. Abraham, God called. Yes, he replied, here I am. He said, take your son, your only son, yes, Isaac, whom you love so much, and go to the land of Moriah. Go and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains, which I will show you. The next morning Abraham got up early. He saddled his donkey and took 2 of his servants with him, along with his son Isaac. Then he chopped wood for a fire for burnt offering, and set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day of the journey, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. Stay here with the donkey, Abraham told the servant. The boy and I will travel a little farther. We will worship there, and then we will come right back. So Abraham placed the wood for the burnt offering on Isaac's shoulder, while he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them walked together, Isaac turned to Abraham and said, Father? Yes, my son, Abraham replied. We had the fire and the wood, the boy said, but where is the sheep for the burnt offering? God will provide a sheep for the burnt offering, my son. Abraham answered, and they both walked away. And so, where does he tell them to go to? The land of what? The land of Moriah. Did he say go to the mountain of Moriah? Or did he say go to the land of Moriah? He said he go to the land of Moriah. Okay, so that's important, what we're going to get into a little bit later. And then, you go into the land of Moriah, then also we have here, it's a 3 days journey. When they get there, this is Abraham's only begotten son, right? And what does he do? What does he put on his son's shoulder? Anybody? Wood for the sacrifice. What did God allow to be put on his only begotten son for his sacrifice? Wood, a wooden cross, right? Everything in the Old Testament symbolizes New Testament, if you look deep enough, right? And so here we have Abraham taking his son Isaac up there, and he takes and he puts the wood on his son's shoulder to take up this mountain or this hill that God told him to go to, right? His only son to be made for a sacrifice. I thought that's pretty neat, right? And how Jesus did the same thing. Let me see what else I can get into here. He says, go to the land of Moriah. Not climb the Mount Moriah. He said, go to the land of Moriah. So Mount Moriah was also known as the old city of Jerusalem, is what they say. And that most of the law states that the sin offering would take place outside the gates. And then they refer to this to the scapegoat of Leviticus. Leviticus 16:27 says, but the bull of the sin offering and the goat of the sin offering, whose blood was brought in to make atonement in the holy place, shall be taken outside the camp, and they shall burn their hides, their flesh, and their refuse in the fire. So after the first goat had been sacrificed, the second goat is taken outside of the city, which Leviticus calls the scapegoat. The priest represents the second goat to the people as they lay hands on the goat, confessing the iniquities of the nation and all the transgressions. And after this, the priest symbolically places those sins upon the head of the goat, releases the goat outside the city to carry the nation's sins away. Jesus Christ is the fulfillment of this law, including this component. He is the scapegoat outside the walls, as seen in John and Hebrews. John 19:17. They took Jesus, therefore. He went out, bearing his own cross, to the place called the place of a skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha. Hebrews 13:12. Therefore Jesus also suffered outside the gate, that he might sanctify the people through his own blood. Hebrews 13:13. So then let us go out to him outside the camp, bearing his reproach. So it had to be outside the camp, outside the city, where Jesus was sacrificed. Okay? And then John 19:20, therefore many of the Jews read this inscription, because the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city. So it was near the city, but outside the city. And it was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. So since Jesus was crucified outside the city walls of the old city, this would lead us to believe that Jesus' death and resurrection was in the region of Moriah, but not inside the old city of Jerusalem, known as the Temple Mount. So a lot of people have said, probably for money gain, they probably said that there's like New Jerusalem and then the Old Jerusalem. They found walls and stuff, and so they say Jesus was sacrificed, his crucifixion was on the Temple Mount. But it says the old city, Jerusalem, is known as the Temple Mount, and so that church there or whatever, that's not actually where it took place, that it's just outside those walls. And then they've got a picture, they got pictures of from years ago and then now, and you can see like two holes and like a little, looks like a nose, so it looks like the skull, right? And on top, it looks like they'd done a bunch, it was kind of level, like they'd done a bunch of excavating, like taking rock to build buildings and stuff, you know, like it almost was like a rock quarry up there where they'd done that. And then the new pictures, it's harder to see, as because I guess erosion and everything. The skull, the nose is not as transparent, right? And so you think I'd see that picture in my mind, I think, wow, that's pretty neat, right? And so why do I say that? Because you go back, God told Abraham to go to the land of Moriah. And he said, and I'll tell you when you get there where to take your son up, right? And so it's very possible that the very place that God has Abraham take Isaac is the very same Golgotha, the very same place where Jesus was going to be sacrificed. And placed on Isaac's own son wood for the sacrifice, the same thing, symbolizing the same thing Jesus would be doing, putting wood on his shoulder, going up to this cross. That's neat to me. That's pretty powerful. That, you know, to be that tied in, right? We'll never fully know. I'll have to wait till I get to heaven to ask Jesus that one, or God, and hey, tell me a little bit more about this, because this is one that I needed the answer to, right? And so I thought that was pretty neat. Matthew 27, it talks about the crucifixion and everything, and how Jesus was everything, a lot of the stuff that he went through. Let's see which one I want to get to. So, in in Matthew 27, verse 26, so Pilate released Barabbas to them. He ordered Jesus flogged with a lead-tipped whip, then turned him over to the Roman soldiers to be crucified. Some of the governor's soldiers took Jesus into their headquarters and called out the entire regiment. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. They wove branches into a crown and put this on his head. And if you remember, I told you that they're saying now that the crown wasn't just a circle, it was a whole entire, like you just put a hat on, your whole head is encapsulated, right, by a hat. It was, the whole thing just didn't have the bill. So it was like a whole dome that they put on his head of these thorns that have been dried out. So they're like nails, they're so hard. I think a lot of people, a lot of guys here, if you've ever cleared land, can attest to how strong a thorn is. And I think, what's her name, the little girl could attest to that. She had that thorn in her foot, right? How tough a thorn is. And then if you know anything about the thorns, if you get them in them, they've also got like poison. So then they cause you to pus up and everything else, even if you, after you take it out, right? So they got this crown of thorns on his head. They give him this little stick, right, to hold like he's a scepter. And then they take this reed, the stick from him, it says in verse 29. And then in 30 it says they grabbed the stick and they struck him on the head with it. So while he's wearing the crown, they're taking this stick and they're beating the crown so that all of these thorns are going into his head, into his skull. And so you can imagine the blood that is just coming down him, right? And then they go and they whip him, right? They give him all these lashes, and as you're being whipped, right? With this, it says it had lead on it. A lot of times they would have put pieces of bone and everything else. But if you've seen the Passion of Christ, or you've heard about, if you've done any research on being whipped, a lot of times when they did the cruel ones where they had stuff tied, it wasn't just the leather, but they tied stuff to it. When it hit your body, it would grab a hold of the flesh, and when they ripped back, it would rip your flesh clean off your body. And so getting that many times, that many lashes, you can imagine, you know, all the muscle and tissue that's being exposed, maybe even your nerves, you know, your whole nerves are running down your back, right? And then after all that, you're being made to carry your own cross, you know, you're at the point of death. And through that whole time, you'll notice that Jesus never once does it record that he cried out in pain. Never once. Have you ever noticed that? Never once did he say he cried out in pain. Man, could you take something like that and not let it out, right? There have been stories about Vikings that if they were found to have done something wrong or whatever, sometimes, I forgot what it was called now, but they would basically kind of been tied to a pole, and they would cut their flesh off, their back, down their whole entire spine where all those nerves are, and they'd pull you out like a butterfly. And you would die like that. And so you're alive the whole time. They're peeling all your flesh and everything off your back and make it look like you got angel's wings. But if they would say, and this is kind of going down the path you don't want to go down, but this is the whole Viking stuff and everything, but in order to get in Valhalla, you had to die a good death. And so in order to go through this, they couldn't cry out in pain. They just had to take it. They had to die a good death. So they'd go through the most grueling death, right? And I'm not tying Jesus to Valhalla. I'm just saying that Jesus, maybe through all this, never cried out once. It doesn't say it. It doesn't talk about him crying out. Going through all this pain and discomfort, he just took it. You know what I mean? Never screamed out in pain, from what I can tell. I think that's pretty amazing in of itself, right? And then it talks about, in verse 45, it says, at noon darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. And at about 3 o'clock, Jesus called out with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you abandoned me? Right? And sometimes that one's always bothered me a little bit. I got questions about that. I want to ask Jesus about that, right? So It's surprising to see the speed of events from the arrest of Jesus until his crucifixion and death. It says he was likely arrested between midnight and 2 a.m. All right? And he was on trial that morning. At dawn, he was on trial. By 9 a.m., he was scourged and nailed to the cross at 9 a.m. And then taking our sin to the grave, then Jesus died by 3 p.m. Okay, so why 3 o'clock? Okay, so according to the Gospel of Mark, it was the third hour when they crucified him, Mark 15:25. In Jewish timekeeping, the third hour is 9 a.m., is what they say. So Jesus hung on the cross from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., 6 hours of this unimaginable suffering, right? From noon to 3 p.m., the land was in complete darkness, Matthew 27:45. In the ninth hour, 3 p.m., Jesus cried out and gave up his spirit. So why is that so significant, right? 9 a.m., the third hour, was the exact time the morning sacrifice, the timid lamb, was offered daily in the temple. Jesus, the true Lamb of God, was lifted up on the cross at the very moment the sacrificial pointed to him. So that's pretty powerful. I thought that was pretty neat. Being Passover, that's also the very time that they did this. So everything happened right on God's divine schedule. Not one detail was random. Jesus didn't just die for us. He died at the exact right time, fulfilling every shadow and prophecy of the Old Testament. But he was pierced for our transgressions. His wounds, by his wounds we are healed, right? And then at 3 o'clock, a lot of times I saw was the last time they would go in. 3 o'clock would be the last time they go in and do the last prayer, the last intercession was at 3 p.m. And then that's when Jesus died and the veil was torn, signifying that all that old law stuff and all that old way of making sacrifices was over with, right? And so it's just neat to me. A lot of times I've seen it, but to go back over it every year, it's just always so neat how much ties in. So as Jesus was dying, one person I saw, they said that they think that when Jesus said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" That was the very exact moment that God the Father turned his back on God and turned towards you. Have you ever thought about that? This whole time he'd always had God, his eyes was totally set on his Son. And then why did he say, my God, why have you forsaken me? Because that was the moment, as he knew his Son was about to take his last breath, that God turned his eyes from his Son and turned them towards you, towards his people, towards the people in the crowd. And for the first time ever, Jesus had such intimacy, such a relationship with God. In that moment, he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? For the first time, he felt his eyes of his Father was not on him, but on his people. And then he gave up his spirit. That would be a powerful thing to think of that, right? That love of the Father, the love of the Son, and for his Spirit to be given up for us, right? To live inside each and every one of us. Jesus paid the price for our sins, made it possible for us to have a direct relationship with God. His sacrifice made him the bridge between God and man. He did that for us. This morning was just a bunch of food for thought. So many different things that, you could go down a deep rabbit hole in so many things that just tie in from Old Testament scripture into Jesus' crucifixion. How much is there? It's such a powerful thing. And how much just lines up with their customs and their time, with the Passover, with the temple and the priest and everything else. Man. Even when they went and asked for Jesus' body. Remember Pilate, he even asked in scripture, it says, he said, what? You mean he's dead already? Like you weren't supposed to die that fast. He was just up there, right? And then they talked about, we always had seen the feet being crossed over and one nail put in it. And they got in one of the museums over there I saw, they've got a person's foot with a spike through it going through the heel. And they had to reuse the spikes They would take all the spikes out of the body. They just wouldn't bury the body with the spikes. They would reuse every spike. But they couldn't get the spike out of that bone, out of the heel bone. So you got your heel, and they would drive right through the heel bone here. And they would, the one I saw, it would be on each side of the cross, each foot, and they'd drive a spike on each side. So there's one spike in each foot. And then of course your legs would be, right? Your knees would be bent, putting all that pressure, one, on all your joints, but also on your lungs and everything else, right? And then when they would go through to break the legs, right, of everybody, to make the process go quicker, when they got to Jesus, right, they didn't break his legs, because they talk about his, no bone would be broken in his body, because he was already dead. And so that's just more and more tidbits, man. It's just amazing, but also the excruciating pain for a person not to cry out. And to go through such brutality and to say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, to even the Roman soldiers that may have been spitting on him, may have been beating him with his own fake sepulcher. Just the love that radiates from this man that we know as Jesus, right? You say, well, I never met the guy. You meet him every single day because his spirit's inside you. You can feel and experience this love, this peace, this gentleness, right? That no one else, you can't experience this anywhere else except in the spirit realm, in your relationship with Christ. It's a powerful thing, man, to be in you get in religion, you start setting aside time in the Word and talking to God, and the peace, the joy that will come over you, to feel His presence. Sometimes I say, God, man, I need to feel you. I need to feel you right now. Sometimes it just feels like someone just wraps their arms around me and just picks me up sometimes. I don't know if anybody's ever experienced that. But man, it's just such a great experience, right? To feel the presence of God in your life. And He's just right there every single day. Every single day I go through life trying to live life according to Dale King. And I'll say, God, where are you at? Where are you at? And God said, I'm right here. I'm walking with you, but He said, you just gotta make time for me. You're so busy living in the flesh, doing everyday worldly stuff. Not being that it's bad worldly stuff, I'm just doing everyday chores and stuff. God's like, you just got to include me. I'm right here walking with you. Include me in your daily life. Right? When I start working, I'm a focused person. Right? I don't like to be bothered a whole bunch. When I'm at work, I like to be focused. But man, I found that it's so easy. When I include God in my work, it's not work to me no more. It's different. It's different for me. Take this stuff, study it out, see what you guys think on some of this stuff. I thought it was pretty neat. Some of these things about Jesus, His love for each and every one of us. As a piano player, and the one vocalist comes up this morning. We got a lot of people out this morning.